Episode 62. Let's do it. Welcome to the Hack Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Barnes, providing right now solutions to some of your biggest teaching and learning problems. Now, let's hack learning. And I think I forgot what I was going to open with. No, wait a minute. I didn't forget. But we are talking about memory today, and it's a really good thing for me because I do forget a lot of things. And I'm excited because we're joined by a memory expert. We've got Brad Zupp, author of Unlock Your Amazing Memory, the fun guide that shows grades 5 to 8 how to remember better and makes school easier. And wouldn't that be a fantastic thing? Since 2009, Brad has been dedicated to testing the limits of his own memory while helping others learn the benefits that come from memory improvement. Brad shows both adults and children how to supercharge their memories to improve grades, relationships, productivity, and peace of mind while remembering more of what they see, hear, and read. Boy, couldn't we all benefit from that? You might even call Brad a memory athlete. He's a 2-time American record setter at the World Memory Championships. I had forgotten that we had World Memory Championships. But again, I think Brad is going to help me and you improve our memories, and more important than just improving them for us, improving them to make teaching and learning better. So, Brad, welcome to Hack Learning. I'd like for you to start us off with a little bit about you, and then let's get right into our first question. How do you help teachers and learners improve?
Well, thanks, Mark. I'm happy to be here. And I think you pretty much covered it with the introduction. I am a record-setting memory athlete. The same way we have physical athletes, we get together and compete to see who has the best memory. I don't have the best memory, but I have a really darn good memory. Certainly one of the top in the world and the top 4 or 5 or 6 in the United States. And as far as I know, I'm the only one that really focuses on helping students, especially young students, learn how to remember better. What I do now is I go into schools, predominantly go into schools with an arts and education assembly about focus and memory improvement. So we make it fun. I do some storytelling and some circus arts, and some memory demonstrations that just make kids go, wow, how do you do that? And then I help them improve their memory. And the teachers love it as well because, as you said, we can all use a little bit of memory help.
Yeah, well, Brad Zupp, let me tell you, I appreciate your honesty about that. You might say you're not the best at memory in the world, but I can tell you one thing. Today, you have the best memory on this show. There is no doubt about that.
Ooh, I finally made it. All right.
And I was not really kidding when I said I want to learn something. I know everyone here is going to learn something truly valuable, but this has really been an issue for me. And, I taught in a classroom for about 23 years. And one of my worst things was memory. I could never remember kids' names. I've written about this and said how it saddens me now because I feel like I got better as my career went on. But, I used to tell kids in the beginning of the year, I will be the last teacher to remember your names. And, for me, I was thinking, well, I'm just giving them a heads up. And I'd say, I'm just not good at this. I'm getting old, whatever. And, since then I've reflected on that and I said, what a horrible thing to tell kids because it's almost like your name's not important enough to remember. And it doesn't matter. I'll get to it eventually. And I thought, boy, I wish I had worked harder back then to be better. And I know you have so many things you'll share today with us that could probably help and would have helped me back then. So I wish I'd known you back then. So tell us, Brad, apart from maybe me and other educators struggling with names, what problem or problems do teachers and learners in general face with memory?
Well, we'll try to cram 4 or 5 hours of helpful material into this 15 minutes or so. The way I help teachers and learners improve, and the biggest problems of teachers and learners versus memory, is we don't have any experience really aside from rote memorization. We just don't have the tools. So people are being asked, kind of to put it in an analogy, people are being asked to lift heavy weights, and no one's shown them proper weightlifting technique. So what I do is I go in And to continue the analogy, I give them like, oh, here's how you do a squat. Here's how you do a bench press. Here's how you do a deadlift. Here's how you can lift up a 40-pound bag of dog food safely. I do kind of the equivalent of that with memory and show people this can be easy. We just haven't really been shown. I think, physically in the 60s, with Jack LaLanne, 70s, Arnold Schwarzenegger, people started saying, look what the body can do. And I think we're just getting into that with the mind. So let me give you kind of like my biggest, bestest tip right off the bat. We have to figure out where we're struggling. Because I always thought memory was a one-time deal, right? We either forget the kid's name or we remember it. We either forget what the area of a parallelogram formula is, or we recall. Turns out remembering is 3 distinct steps. And think of steps up to the next level in school. We have to get up all 3 steps or we're not going to get up to that level. The first and the most basic and probably the most important step is we have to focus. If we're not focusing when the kid says their name the first day in school or the 100th day in school, we're not going to be able to recall it later. I give the analogy, what is the height of the Statue of Liberty? Well, you don't say, oh, I forgot, because no one's ever told you that. So we can't recall something we don't, encode. So the first step is, are we getting the information? Once we get the information, then we need to organize it in our mind. And that's where a lot of the adults go wrong, is we get the information, we're paying attention, but there's just so much other stuff going on. And we don't have a system. It's like piling everything on our desk. If we pile everything on our desk, we can find it eventually, but we got to sift through the piles. So there has to be a way to organize it in the mind. And the last step before we get the prize, get the memory, is recalling it. We have to have a system for recalling it. And we have to be getting enough sleep, and we have to not be stressed, and we have to not be freaked out, especially our students, about, oh my gosh, it's quiz time, and I always do horribly at quizzes, so they blank out. So the best tip I have is for educators themselves is to figure out where you might be struggling, and then use that with, okay, now, that makes complete sense. I focus really well, but then I get distracted and I don't encode it well enough, so I don't save it. That's why I can't recall it later. Then you can help the student with that. When the student is obviously distracted, you're like, well, they're not remembering well because they're not getting this information.
I think that distraction, I wanted to get this in before I forget because I'm so awful at it.
we need a coaching call after this just to give you a few more tips.
We do. So I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, this is the one thing when you're hosting a show like this, you're always thinking, what I really need a good follow-up question. And then you mentioned distractions. And I'm thinking, okay, he has said so much here that is so powerful about memory, and already I've lost some of it because I'm distracted. So I think that's one key for me. And what I would like to do, in a moment we're going to get to the what you can do tomorrow part of the Hack Learning podcast, where you can tell our listeners, here are 2 or 3 things you could do tomorrow to improve memory. Now, you've already given us some great tips, but as I said, one of the things with me is distraction. So maybe when we get to that part, you could give us something to say, okay, how can I declutter and get rid of all the distractions so I can improve my memory? But before we do that, I would like to tell everyone about today's sponsor, Kiddom. Hey, education hacker, Kiddom helps teachers turn personalized learning from a buzz phrase to reality. With Kiddom, teachers gain access to an unlimited library of standards-aligned content with beautiful, actionable reports. The best part is, Kiddom is 100% free. Check it out today. Go to kiddom.co/hacklearning to start engaging your students one-on-one. That's kiddom.co/hacklearning. So, Brad Zupp, memory expert, memory athlete, author of Unlock Your Amazing Memory. You've given us some amazing tips about focus and recall, I believe, was one of those. And maybe something else, but I know in listening and thinking ahead, a problem, and I'm sure a lot of teachers and learners have, I got distracted. Give us 2 or 3 things that we can do tomorrow to improve our memory and become better teachers and learners?
Today and tomorrow, we can start by asking ourselves, and if people are still working in the classroom, asking the students, how are we going to remember that? That automatically draws the mind to, if I'm asking myself that, either just mentally or if I'm asking my kids that, then we have to take a second and go, let's see, how am I going to remember that? And that just brings the focus right back to the topic. We eliminate the distraction, and then we have to actually solve the problem. And the mind loves to solve problems. We're expert problem solvers. And the good news is we know how to remember. We do remember so many things. So a lot of times it's bringing the focus back, saying, how am I going to remember that? And then saying, you know what? His name is Mark. And my family was going to name me Mark. Well, isn't that's a funny coincidence. He doesn't look anything like me, but maybe that's why my family didn't name me Mark. And this is internal dialogue that cements your name is Mark. And I've got it. And when we ask our kids that, say, whatever the topic is, how are you going to remember that? And you can ask that rhetorically in the classroom, or you can even say, Mark, how are you going to remember to get your permission slip signed? Oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, and then listen to Mark come up with this wild scheme on how he's going to remember it. Encourage that and say, okay, Joe, how are you going to remember that? And then people start thinking, there's a lot of different ways to remember. There's a lot of creative ways to remember. What's my creative way? And then it becomes a fun group activity. Obviously, you can't do that with every subject and everything in a classroom, but occasionally mentioning that will just get kids in the habit of asking themselves, how am I going to remember that?
Yeah, that internal dialogue, and I think in education, we're all about the Q&A. It would be great if we could get kids to create that dialogue with themselves, to say, how am I going to remember this? What a simple question, and that is so hack learning. That's what we're about, is the simplicity. We don't love the 5-year plans. Yep. Who can remember them, right?
Can I give one more real quick?
One more, please do.
Easy for I'm sure teachers are already doing this, but whether there's homework or not, and there was a previous podcast about the pros and cons of that, and we could have many more. But whether there's homework or not, encourage them to go home and at the dinner table, talk to their family about this particular class, or even talk to their peers in the hallway, about what was written on the whiteboard or the chalkboard, what was covered, what was confusing, but just bringing the mind's focus to, and when Mr. Barnes said, I have no idea what he's talking about, what is he talking about? And then their friend will say, well, I think he's meaning, that tells the mind, this is important, pay more attention to this, and move it into long-term storage.
Yeah, that's great. So we're getting kids to leave the classroom and to carry on the dialogue. Start with the internal dialogue and say, how am I going to remember this? And then turn that into a dialogue at home with other people or friends or family, and to sort of give back and say, this is some of the things we had today. Fabulous stuff, and I love the simplicity of it because that's just what we believe in here. So Brad Zupp, author of Unlock Your Amazing Memory and Memory Athlete and record-setting memory guy. I thought about doing some really cool thing where I would rattle off a bunch of stuff and quiz you. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, this is audio, this is podcasting. I'm like, people are going to say, well, wait a minute, he's probably just writing that down somewhere. So, if we were doing video, we would have done that.
I'm doing a world record attempt in a couple weeks, but I've memorized the first 10,000 digits of pi. That's step one. Step two is judges are going to give me 5-digit chunks, and I have to give them the chunk before and after the chunk they give me. They give me 50 of those, and it's a timed recall. So a friend and I are doing that challenge. We're challenging each other to set world records in that, see which one does better to bring attention to memory fitness.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I think our listeners will want to know how that goes. So maybe we can tweet it out. Maybe we can add to our show notes page. So certainly stay in touch with me and let us know how that goes, and we will update people. And in the future, we'll have to revisit this because I think you've given us marvelous tips to remember. But in case we forget anything, we can have you back in the future, and we can have a refresher. Brad, other than your upcoming competition, is there anything else that our listeners should know about you? Any place they should go to find and learn more about memory improvement?
Definitely. We've given them a lot of good action tips. But if they want more, especially the classroom teachers, you can find, I think you're probably going to put up in the show notes, tips to help your child improve focus and remember better. That's a great resource that covers what we've talked about in more depth, and also the first 2 chapters of my book, so you can preview the book and see if it's appropriate for you or your classroom. And if anybody has any questions, email me, brad@bradzupp.com. It should be in the show notes as well. And I'm happy to do kind of some triage or say, it sounds like this might be your problem, or it sounds like this might be the step you're tripping up on, or have you tried this with your students? I'm absolutely passionate about helping people realize that there are other ways and other tools to remember besides rote memorization, which I hated when I was a kid. So
you and me both.
Pick my brain, and I'm happy to help for free. It's just something I'm passionate about.
Well, we really appreciate that. I always say I'm amazed by the marvelous people we have on the show, and I love when they say, hey, you email me. We always love that. We will put it on the show notes page, and we're going to revisit this because it's fantastic. Brad Zupp, thank you so much for helping us hack learning today.
Thank you, Mark.
As always, we continue the conversation at #HackLearning on Twitter and on the show notes page at hacklearningpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.